I'm Afshin Ratansi. We're going underground as who becomes the new so-called leader of the free world is decided through litigation. Coming up on the show.
So we are going to continue the lawsuit here. We're going to bring a second one, and then we're going to bring a federal lawsuit. And we're going to take a very good look at whether we bring this nationally. We certainly are going to bring it here and in Wisconsin. Quite possibly, we'll do a national lawsuit and really expose the corruption of the Democrat Party. But this is beyond anything I've ever seen before. This comes when you think you have so much power and you own the media that you can do anything you want.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late. I've already decisively won many critical states, including massive victories in Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio. To name just a few, we won these and many other victories despite historic election interference from big media, big money, and big tech.
As Trump heads to the courts to salvage his presidency, lawyer and author of the case against impeaching Trump, Professor Alan Dershowitz tells us why Donald Trump may soon win a second term in court.
We're keeping the oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil.
Now, I can take you to any part of the world, and we put in 300,000 or 150,000 troops. We can absolutely end the carnage, but we're there.
And in the wake of an election that will arguably do nothing to change the course of U.S. imperialism, what can we learn from the United States' history about pretexts for war and regime change? We ask Vijay Prashad about the Washington Bullets catalyzing global carnage. All this and more coming up in today's Going Underground. But first, as Trump goes to the courts to try and win a second term, I'm joined now from Massachusetts by lawyer and author of the case against impeaching Trump, Professor Alan Dershowitz, who says the law may favor Donald Trump. Alan, thanks so much for coming back on. Why do you think Trump may win in the courts?
Well, it depends on how he loses in the states. If he loses the election by losing Pennsylvania, there's a strong argument that his lawyers can make that Pennsylvania should not count ballots that came in late. It's a technical argument, but it's the argument that prevailed in Bush versus Gore, and there are already 3 or 4 justices who agree with that argument. But it would take a combination of circumstances during the election to bring that case into a posture where he would win in the court. So I think it's unlikely that he will prevail in the courts, but that's his best shot.
You've broke media myths about different cases time and time again over your decades in law. What impact do you think the so-called mainstream media is going to make on the case? They seem to have already decided that Joe Biden is the president of the United States.
Well, the media mostly engages in wishful thinking, and they're often wrong because they substitute what they hope will happen for a careful analysis of what will happen. And, the most likely outcome, obviously, is that Biden gets elected with more than 270 electoral votes, and he wins in court. If you have to be betting money, that's where you have to be betting. But with our judicial system, it's impossible to predict the outcome.
What sort of time scale are we talking about? Will it be about a month, as it was in 2000 with Bush and Gore?
If it turns out that Biden wins the election without Pennsylvania, I think we'll have a result within weeks, not months. If Pennsylvania becomes a key state, then I think it will take months.
Do you think Trump always had in mind the 300 judges that were appointed under his administration, given that he'd already been suspecting vote tampering?
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons why he wanted to appoint lots of judges. His base wants conservative judges, but I think part of the reason may very well have been as a backstop, as a protection, in the event that he had to take the election to court. Any president would think in those terms.
How is the average American supposed to understand what on earth is going on? You may know that social media company Twitter is already throttling the ability to share tweets made by President Trump about the election.
Well, Twitter is violating its own terms. It gets exemption from defamation suits because it's supposed to be only a platform, but it's become a publisher, and it decides what goes in and what stays out, and it decides whether to flag tweets or not. That's not its job. And I think the American public is getting fed up with the social media and them being exempt from, they're above the law in some ways, and yet they act in a way that's inconsistent with the law.
Obviously, Twitter denies that and says it's changing all the time as to its policies as regards politics. What do you think the role of lawyers will be on behalf of Trump? We had his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, on the program. He's been giving press conferences in Philadelphia to the press. Will you be helping the case, or do you see that it'll be Giuliani and his team who will be defending the Trump presidency?
It'll be Giuliani and his team. I've known Rudy for, 30 or 40 years. I've done my duty to the president of the United States of America by defending him against the unconstitutional impeachment charge. On this issue, I'm going to just sit back and watch. I have my own podcast where I analyze the case, and I will be an observer and a commentator, but not a participant.
It's a bit historical now, but what he was telling us on the program was about Hunter Biden and making extraordinary allegations about the president's son and maybe the president's son, and certainly the future President Biden himself. Why do you think it didn't make any headway on the news channels in the United States ahead of polling day?
Well, I think some of the news channels did cover it. If they were anti-Biden, they covered it. If they were pro-Biden, they didn't cover it. That's a tragedy that you don't get objective news. It should have been covered. It should have been investigated. It's a serious charge. But the media, if they're pro-Biden, just say it's an uncorroborated, unproved, undocumented charge, and the other side acts as if it's totally proven. It's a charge worthy of being investigated, and I suspect it will be investigated if and when Joe Biden becomes President Biden.
What did you feel on the night when you were watching Florida declare so decisively relative to 2000 and the other states coming in?
I was surprised. I vote in Florida, and I thought Florida would be much closer, as it has been in the past. The remarkable thing about this election is how little has changed over the past 4 years. Obviously, the country has changed dramatically, but the vast majority of states voted the same way they did 4 years ago. The difference in the popular vote, about 3 million, is about the same as it was. The only difference is a handful of states, which in close elections went the other way, and that will determine the outcome of the election.
Supporters of Trump say he shouldn't have given that press conference on the night saying there is fraud and waited a little bit. Do you think that will affect any court outcome? Because he was alleging possible fraud even before the election and, of course, on the night, rather than saying this is the state of play at the moment, we'll wait and see.
I don't think that kind of statement affects the courts, and it was done after the polls were closed. So I think it was just him saying what he believed, and I don't think it'll have any impact either electorally or judicially.
Now, just finally on something different, I know you've been accused of being part of the Epstein sex trafficking scandal. We had a guy on who worked for Israeli intelligence who made a claim that Epstein and Maxwell were Israeli spies. Anything that you knew of the Daily Mirror pension fund being used to finance Epstein and Israeli intelligence being involved?
I'm totally convinced that that's completely false. As false as the accusations against me. In my case, the accusations, we have emails that my accuser tried to suppress in which she admits she never met me. We have her lawyer on tape admitting that she was wrong. We have the FBI, former FBI, investigating it. I have been totally, completely exonerated, and the proof is overwhelming that my accuser made up the whole story. And I think people are making up stories about the Mossad. I don't think there's any truth to that at all.
Why do you think people who knew Epstein and Maxwell are saying things like that?
Well, you know, he's a mysterious character. People don't know a lot about him. He visited me once in Israel. I think it was the only time he was ever in Israel. He didn't seem to know anybody there. I arranged a lunch for him at the time before I knew anything wrong or anything improper that he had done. I arranged a lunch with him with the judges and justices and important people. He had never met any of those people. I can't imagine that he had any contact with Israel, but It's easy to make up stories, and I think the media has an obligation to check those stories. I've asked the FBI to investigate me and investigate my accuser. One of us should be charged with perjury, and it obviously should be her because I never met her. She made up the whole story. I think we have to be so cautious about Epstein-related stories because people are so inclined to make them up, especially now that he's dead and he has no opportunity to respond. I'm not here arguing for Epstein. What he did, what I found out he did afterward, is terrible, but I didn't know about it. Most people who knew him didn't know about it before, but I doubt he had any connection to any intelligence agency.
Why do you think the media are more interested in that story than the Hunter Biden alleged corruption vis-a-vis Ukraine?
Well, they shouldn't be. I mean, shouldn't be. One is about a man who will be president of the United States. The other is about an obscure financial guy who's dead. But one is salacious, the other is not. And I think the media follow salacious stories and they don't investigate properly. If they investigated the accusations against me with the same rigor that they've investigated other allegations, they would dismiss them out of hand. And I hope they do. I'm an open book. I've done nothing wrong. That's why I'm prepared to speak about it. Many of the other people who have been accused aren't prepared to speak about it, but I have nothing to hide. Absolutely nothing.
And I should ask you, given that Trump gave the Golan Heights illegally occupied under UN resolution to Israel, recognized Jerusalem as the capital with the U.S. embassy there, what, if Biden does become president, will be U.S.-Israel relations?
The occupation of the Golan Heights is completely, totally lawful. As a professor of law specializing in these kinds of issues, I can assure you that capturing a battleship in an aggressive war waged against you and not giving it back is perfectly lawful. The United States did the right thing.
Okay, the UN Security Council resolution is different.
Wrong.
But
well, the UN Security Council resolution is dead wrong, and it's been wrong in the past. But
as for Biden,
he will stand by the decisions made by President Trump. The only place he'll deviate, perhaps, is on the Iran deal, where he'll go back and try to get a better deal from Iran. But he won't reverse Jerusalem. He won't reverse the Golan Heights. And he certainly won't reverse the peace process between Israel and the Gulf states, which is a very positive development.
So Israel has nothing to fear. Not that much difference between Trump or Biden.
I think Biden will be better than Obama, but not quite as good for Israel as Trump. But I think Biden will be fine. I've known Biden for 40 years. He's always been pro-Israel, generally. And I think support for Israel will remain bipartisan among the Democrats and the Republicans, with a few exceptions on the hard left of the Democratic Party.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you.
Thank you.
After the break. Washington ballots to Washington bullets. Will the U.S. election do little to impede the march of U.S. imperialism? We ask author Vijay Prashad about assassinations in the name of democracy. All this and more coming up in part 2 of Going Underground.